So in this presentation, we're going to look at making the final connections for our lighting circuit inside the two-way distribution board. We're going to identify the line, neutral and CPC conductors as circuit number 1, nearest the main switch. There is no secondary circuit in here. We're also going to terminate the conductors and tighten them up with our torque screwdriver to the required Newton meters of torque for both the circuit breaker and the neutral and earth bars. Let's see how we're going to identify those conductors and how we're going to dress them neatly within the consumer's unit in order that there's enough spare within there in case the termination becomes damaged or the consumer unit is changed in the future and our connecting points are not quite in the same place. So at the minute we've got the earth bar on the left hand side, neutral bar on the right hand side. In the future the board may be upgraded, maybe to a larger distribution board, and we want to make sure we leave enough cable inside the consumer's unit that we can reposition them in the future. So my conductors are ready for termination. The conductors are longer than the consumer unit again, so we've got plenty of cable to work with there. And I've identified at the moment my neutral with a number 1 and my circuit protective conductor with a number 1. And now I'm going to take a identifying tag and roll it over the line conductor to also identify as number 1. Circuit breaker position next to the main RCCB is circuit number 1. The one next to that would be circuit number 2. We identify them in the event of us needing to remove the circuit. When I disconnect the line conductor out the top of the breaker with number 1 on, I'll be looking in the neutral bar for number 1 and the earth bar for the circuit protective conductor number 1 in order that they can be removed from the distribution board itself. So let's look how we're going to terminate the conductors and dress them neatly now within the consumer's unit. So it doesn't matter which order I'm going to terminate my conductors in, but I'm going to use the top termination as number 1 in the neutral bar and the top termination in the earth bar for my circuit protective conductor. Let's start then with the neutral conductor. So as always, I need to get it as straight as I possibly can before I start. So I'll run it through my fingers and we're going to dress it straight down the back. Okay, it's going to be a little bit awkward because I've got to try and get my head out of the way for the presentation. It's going to sit along the buzz bar at the back here, which it can't go below in this Crabtree design. So I'm going to sit it along there, along the back, and then I'm going to kick it round so it can be connected into my neutral bar. Must make sure I can still see the number 1 at termination point, and I'm going to cut the conductors just there. And as always, we're going to double over our terminations. Take our knife, score round, and remove the outside insulation. Then I'm going to double over that termination in order to go into the termination itself. Move those out of the way. As always, I've picked the world's worst pair of pliers because I never check. Okay, so let's lay that flat. So I've doubled over my termination. I've got my torque screwdriver set to the appropriate Newton meters of torque for both the neutral and earth bar. So in this case, it is going to be at 1.7 Newton meters in torque for these. So I'll undo the top termination. Position my neutral into the connection and hopefully we get it to tighten up correctly. And we're at the appropriate torque setting for the neutral. Now I can dress it. Need to make sure that I can see the number 1. I want to make a gentle smooth bend in the distribution board, remembering my tails will be coming in from the top at some point. So I've come down straight, I've gone on top of the buzz bar at the back here, came up and got a nice smooth bend. I make sure I can see the number 1 and I've used the top termination for the neutral. I'm going to go on and do the circuit protective conductor next. So next I'm going to do the CPC. So I've moved my number 1 up out the way. Again, I'm going to come straight down and I'm going to bring it then across and back into the top termination. So it's probably about there that I've got to cut back to. So if I just slide it down and then cut away, hopefully I've got it now a better length for the CPC itself. So I'm going to double the end over first and terminate it into the top termination on the earth bar, and then I'll dress it afterwards. Nice smooth bend again into position. And work to the correct torque setting, which is the same as the neutral bar at 1.7 Newton meters for this style of distribution board. So now I'm just going to pop the CPC back into a similar position to where the neutral was. Just use my fingers just to dress it back a little bit. and then back up again, and then put a nice smooth bend in it. It's going to take a little while to fiddle around and get them straight in there. So we'll go with that at the moment. Got to make sure we can see our number one, which has fallen back a little bit. So I am going to just bring that back round. So I take it back out again, move the number one closer to the termination position. Apologise. And so we can see it there at termination, and then poke it back in again. And dress it hopefully straight down. And then straight back up again. Okay. So there we go. I'm going to have a little fiddle with that before I go on to look at the connection for the line conductor and fitting the circuit breaker as well. So I've terminated my circuit protective conductor into the top of the earth bar. I've connected my neutral into the top of the neutral bar, and now it's all about dressing the line conductor, which is also identified with the number one, so it can pop around and into the top of the circuit breaker. I've shown you in a previous presentation how to fit Crabtree star breaker circuit breakers. It's for a lighting circuit, so it's rated at 6 amps. We're simulating a domestic dwelling, so it's a type B circuit breaker. So I'm going to come down the back, curl it over and into the top like so. I need to cut it back, and I need to double it over. This time the Newton meters of torque for the circuit breaker is different to that of the neutral and earth bar, and I've set my torque screwdriver to 2.3 Newton meters of torque. Double my termination over as we always do. Take my 6 amp type B circuit breaker for a domestic dwelling. I'm going to pop it into position onto the DIN rail, and hopefully it finds and locates itself into position, and that's ready for the final termination of the line conductor into the top of the circuit breaker, and then tightening up with a torque screwdriver. So I'm ready to drop my line connection into the top of the 6 amp circuit breaker, going in with the torque screwdriver, making sure I screw into the copper, and we get it to the required torque setting. Okay, we're up to the required torque setting. I can see the number one. I need to just play around now to make sure that these come down straight and up and over straight and look super neat. But for all intents and purposes, I've made the final connections in my distribution board, labelling my neutral number one, my line number one, and my circuit protective conductor number one. It means that when I go to test, this circuit board was full of say 10 circuits, and I wanted to test for the first test, which we're going to look at in the next presentation, for continuity of CPC and polarity of a lighting circuit. I can easily remove the line conductor number one and connect it to the circuit protective conductor number one. Okay, so they're the final connections for the lighting circuit in 1mm squared cable, fused at college at 6 amps in the type B circuit breaker for a domestic dwelling. So to recap then, we've terminated our 1mm squared PVC twin and CPC cable for a lighting circuit into our two-way metal clad domestic 17th edition Amendment 3 consumer's unit or distribution board, whatever you'd like to call it. We've got additional protection offered by an RCCB, rated at 30 milliamps or less. We've got a circuit breaker type B, 6 amps for our lighting circuit. We've identified the neutral, the line and the CPC with number one. It's the first circuit, it's next to the main RCCB. This would be circuit number 2 when that circuit breaker is fitted for an additional circuit. We've used the manufacturer's instructions to get the required Newton meters of torque for both the neutral bar and the earth bar, which are identical at 1.7 Newton meters. We've got the appropriate torque setting for the top of a circuit breaker. In this case, I've set it to 2.4 Newton meters of torque, and our distribution board is now ready for our first test. And the first test we're going to carry out is continuity of CPC and polarity. After that test, we're going on to carry out the insulation resistance test of our one-way lighting circuit.